Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, who you just saw in that shot, as a matter of fact, ranking member of the House Budget Committee. Congressman, Norman seems to be arguing that if Republicans knew everything that was in this bill, they might not be so quick to vote yes. On the other hand, there is an argument to be made. It's almost impossible not to know, if you're on Capitol Hill, what the main points of contention are, right, at the very least. But is there, do you think, one compelling argument that you think has the potential to stop this bill in its current form?
Well, great to be back with you. And the headline that I always lead with when I talk about this bill, when I'm back home in Philadelphia and people are asking me about it, say it's as simple as this. 17 million Americans are going to lose their health care in order to help subsidize tax cuts for the top 1%. There are, of course, a number of other things that are in this piece of legislation as well. I think the concerns that Ralph Norman and others, such as myself, were raising yesterday in Rules Committee is that they had us gavel in about 20 minutes after the Senate had passed a bill that they had actually made a lot of changes to and inserted certain things. The major headlines didn't change. You still have millions of Americans losing their health care to subsidize tax cuts for the rich. But there were all these late insertions, especially for the senator from Alaska, that frankly a lot of Republicans just had no idea were in there because they couldn't speed read 1,000 pages in 15 minutes.
So let me play for you what we just heard, I think in the last hour, from your House leader.
So all we need are 4 Republicans to join us in support of their constituents, to have John McCain level courage and stand up in defense of the health care of the American people.
And there you are again, in the middle of this conversation. It is easy, though, right, for your side of the aisle to say they should just stand up to Donald Trump. Also, I'm not sure there's any Democrat who has ever, well, I would say there is no Democrat who has ever faced a president like Donald Trump. But are you hearing from Republicans who are seriously considering making this the moment that they say no?
Well, actually, once upon a time, I was a freshman member about 11 years ago, and I stood up and voted against a major foreign policy priority of a president of my own party, President Obama. I know that it isn't easy, and it's generally not a fun experience. But for those Republican members who are considering it, I would say this: whether you serve here 2 years, 20 years, no matter how long, imagine if you can be the person who actually stops a bill pushing through that would strip health care away from millions of Americans. We still know the name John McCain today. We might not as easily be able to name all of those Republicans who are voting yes to repeal Obamacare 8 years ago. I'll also say this to those Republicans who maybe won't be swayed by an appeal to being courageous. Keep in mind there's a reason why Profiles in Courage was a short book. I would say if you're not going to be courageous, be afraid of your own voters next November. This bill is polling worse than any other major piece of legislation in my lifetime. There's a political science professor at George Washington University who said it was actually the worst polling he's ever seen on a major piece of legislation. So I believe House Republicans who vote for this, if it passes, many of them, dozens and dozens of them, will lose their jobs next November because of it.
So let me play devil's advocate, if I can, Congressman. Democrats, including you, seem to be assuming that Republicans are indeed gambling their futures individually and as a party on a bill that, frankly, will make them pay a price. But what makes you confident of that? Because Donald Trump has proved he's been underestimated by his opponents, and maybe if not underestimated, he seems in many instances to have outmaneuvered the opposition.
I don't underestimate Donald Trump, especially in terms of the influence he has among Republican primary voters. There's no question that there are Republican members who are scared to death of crossing Donald Trump because one tweet or social media post from him can do real damage to their careers within a Republican primary. But what I'm talking about is slightly different. For those 40 or 50 House Republican members who are facing a competitive general election, I would argue to them they should be more afraid of their general election audience than
Peter, President Trump has not been shy about saying very directly there will be consequences for Republicans who don't fall in line. Beyond that, what's he doing?
Well, you can see the West Wing here. That's the Marine Guard out front, which means the president is here in the West Wing. We believe he's taking meetings. We know over the course of the day he'll be meeting with some of those moderates, as Melanie noted, also meeting with some of the Freedom Caucus members here. But the bottom line for the president is this really is the biggest test of his presidential power in this second term to date right now. He's succeeded in getting lawmakers, Republicans, to sort of bow to his every move to this point so far. They have approved his nominees. They cheered his overhaul of the federal bureaucracy as a function of DOGE under the leadership then of Elon Musk. And now it's his signature legislative priority, this one big, beautiful bill, as he describes it right now. The president posting a series of posts on this issue earlier today. You saw the Speaker, Mike Johnson, saying that he's going to use the cards he's been dealt as best he can. The president views that game of cards a little bit differently. He wrote, "Republicans, don't let the radical left Democrats push you around. We've got all the cards, and we are going to use them." So the president, who has really succeeded in at times bullying and threatening lawmakers, certainly the Democrats, Republicans as well, is pushing ahead with the hopes that this can be resolved by July 4th, by the end of this week, which will allow him to celebrate a major historic victory in his view here. But for a lot of Republican lawmakers, they're the ones who face the real political peril, as we've been discussing here, Chris. These lawmakers are the ones facing midterms coming up this fall if they vote against the president, like Thomas Massie has suggested of Kentucky. President Trump has said anybody I endorse would beat Massie by 25 points, so they face the risk of the president's bully pulpit, as it were, to try to defeat them in a primary. The flip to that is if they vote against things that may harm some of their own constituents, with many constituents in rural communities among those who could be affected by cuts to Medicaid, they could face the political peril in terms of the view of their constituents back at home. So it is a perilous position for a lot of those Republican lawmakers, but perhaps the best demonstration, again, to this point, of the strength of this power over the Republican Party in this second term.
Without a doubt. Peter, thank you for that. So, Brendan, take us behind the scenes. Yesterday, we saw how a deal could be made with Senator Lisa Murkowski. What are the conversations like, do you imagine, between Speaker Johnson or the president and these holdouts today? Is there something he can offer to hardliners?
Well, Johnson certainly has a tougher time than Thune. I mean, as Melanie laid out, they can't change the bill at this point. And what Thune had the ability to do was give Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, something, anything to make her feel better about it. They can't do that here. Any changes would delay this, not just for a few days, but I think quite significantly, perhaps weeks. I think what they're going to end up doing is one, trying to, I think, go a little bit under the surface of what these conservatives are saying. I have a hard time taking too seriously some of these fiscal conservative concerns about what the Senate has done. I can tell you that House members are just generally allergic to anything the Senate does, regardless of what the substance is. If you're a fiscal conservative, the Senate is cutting Medicaid further than what the House did. The Senate is cutting taxes further than what the House did. Their concern is the overall cost, but I have a hard time seeing a lot of these fiscal conservatives going to the White House and telling Donald Trump that they want to cut taxes less or try to convince him to cut Medicaid even more. None of those things are going to happen. Now, will they promise them something next time? Sure. I mean, they've been doing that every step of the way. There's always, we'll get them next time. I don't think that they should delude themselves into thinking that there is a rainbow, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow at some point where we're finally going to be able to balance the budget. I mean, if there were spending cuts that could pass, they would be in here. They just can't. So some of this is just people coming to reality. I don't think they're going to be able to get to that reality today because this is a lot for them to swallow. But they're going to need to set aside their pride. And I'm guessing that Mike Johnson's strategy.
But is it pride or is it principle?
Certainly, it's potentially principle. But again, these House members already voted for a bill that cut less spending. They already voted for a bill that cut taxes significantly. I don't think that there is a substantive issue at play here. I think this is House members not liking that the Senate did something different and feeling like they need to express themselves. So I don't think that's going to get them very far. I don't think that's a good enough argument to win over Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump's going to lean on them. And ultimately, most, if not all of them, are going to break.
So speaking of leaning, Basil, the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, just said basically game on.
Yeah.
Like, we're keeping this up. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep explaining to the American people what's going on here. But of course, Democrats can't control the outcome. So can they seize this moment in a meaningful way?
Yeah, and two things with that. The first is the more time goes by as this debate continues and there are more holdouts and people start expressing concern about whether they should or should not vote for it, it gives Democrats an opportunity to chime in and say, this is why this bill is horrible. It affects so many more Americans than perhaps previously thought. They have the opportunity to take the town halls that Republicans won't do and go into those rural communities because, of course, it's really important to contest everywhere. So even if it's not friendly territory to Democrats, it's an opening for Democrats to talk about why this bill is bad. The other point, which is important in my view, is that as many people talk about Lisa Murkowski and her vote, remember, it was Senator Murkowski who in April said, we're all afraid. So the question then, we're talking about Donald Trump and his retaliation.
And what Peter just reported.
Right. So the question then becomes, who are these members going to be more afraid of, Donald Trump or their actual constituents? And it's the job of Democrats to make them more afraid of their constituents than Donald Trump. I don't know if that changes the calculus at the end of the day with respect to the bill, but it may change Democrats' election outcomes in the midterms.
Brendan, every time Speaker Johnson has been up against the wall, and you've known what it is to work for a speaker who's up against the wall, but he's come out on the other side, right? And I'm wondering here if you see that for Speaker Johnson, and I don't just mean does this pass in some form, does he get out of this with the Republican Party as minimally scathed as can be expected given what's in this bill?
Seeing here is the Trump budget bill collapse in the House because there's no one is meaningfully defending it. And I saw, I'm not going to play it for you because I don't want to spook you on the video unnecessarily. But Bannon. Steve Bannon was on his show, I think, earlier this morning, basically furious at Republicans for like not getting out there and going on offense and like talking up this bill, being like, why aren't our guys going out there and talking about how this bill has some good things in it and blah, 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 blah. And it's like Bannon, like, look, I actually never thought, I know Bannon's evil and dangerous and kind of crazy. I didn't think he was dumb. I didn't. Maybe you are dumb, Steve, because there's a reason they're not defending it, because it's not worth defending. The only strategy the Republicans have right now is hope that Trump's bullying and threats work and gets people to vote for it, or they just keep their heads down and say nothing, because if you've got nothing good to say, don't say anything at all. The Democrats are trashing this bill because there's a lot to trash. If this was a good budget bill from Trump, they would be quiet themselves and they would, be throwing a few things out there, but mostly they would be keeping their heads down because it's like, well, we don't like him and we don't want to give him ammo and it's going to pass and we'll fight the next one. If he was passing a region, but Trump's not doing that. Trump is passing an insane bill with insane provisions, and there's no defending it. And what's really interesting is that even from Bannon's perspective, Bannon, who's been critical of this, cut social programs to give money to the rich approach because he knows it's bad for MAGA solidarity, Steve, this is your nightmare bill. Everything you've pretended to want for years is being destroyed by this bill. That's why they're quiet.